Hello, I'm the Angry Spork. After the big two cross paths so epically, let's wind things down a bit and focus on a crossover between Marvel's two biggest teams. I'm taking issue with Bloodties, which sees a looming threat bring together the Avengers and the X-Men. And in a first for the series, I've had this in my collection for several years, but haven't really gotten around to reading it until now. So this will be my first go-through. Should be interesting. Let's see if this comic makes us want to turn the page or turn our heads. We begin with Avengers number 368, Bob Harris writing, with Steve Epting and Tom Palmer on art. The cover features a cityscape in the background, some ominous smoke, and Professor Xavier facing the reader in his classic hover chair. Behind him are Beast, Captain America, the Maximoff twins, Quicksilver's wife Crystal holding their child Luna, and the Black Knight holding a knockoff lightsaber. It looks like they just finished a battle, so maybe it was with George Lucas's lawyers. Though eventually they'd both be consumed by the mouse. And before anyone tries to call cheat on this, even the cover says this is a crossover. So there. We open to the island republic of Genosha, specifically its capital city, Hammer Bay, and it's on fire. Oh, so New 52 Stephanie Brown just moved there. Fabian Cortez looks at the terrible beauty while telling a child about how the chaos was likely inevitable between mutants and humans. Once word of the fires gets out, Cortez expects a visit from the girl's parents and grandfather, and confirms the child he's holding is Luna Maximoff. Look, Pietro, I know parents need time away from their kids now and again, but you need to really up your standards on babysitters. In Washington, D.C., the State Department has a Bureau of Mutant Affairs, and currently Dr. Valerie Cooper, director of the Mutagenic Relations and associate of X-Factor, shows smuggled video of Genosha's carnage to Henry Peter Gyrick of the National Security Council and S.H.I.E.L.D. director Nick Fury, looking like he just got back from going undercover in a 90s-era Image comic. Tensions on the island were bad enough with a virus spreading across the mutate population, but then sometime before this, Magneto generated an EM pulse wave to show the world he was still a-kickin', after not being heard from for some time. So rather than risk the master of magnetism inciting former slave mutants into rebellion, the humans decided to just kill them all. Because that's going to go over well with one of the world's most powerful mutants that's also a Holocaust survivor. The mutates started fighting back with their powers, and the hopes of a unified Genosha begin dissolving, blamed on Magneto's actions, though strangely not blaming the slavery or attempted genocide. Smart. Gyrick is assigned to escort the president's candidate to broker a peace settlement, and they'll be joined by two mutants' rights activists, Philip Moreau, whose father was the first to develop the mutate bonding process, so his family carries some weight, and Jennifer Ransom, about whom we get no information at this time. Valerie elaborates that new intelligence suggests things could get worse, which is where Nick Fury comes in, who has to be told this is a non-smoking area and puts out his stogie. Lots of disgusting things in life, Val. Some even make smoking look downright respectable. Unless Joe Quesada's in charge, in which case smoking is probably the worst thing you can possibly do. Not like pacts with Satan. Those are not only okay, but sometimes encouraged. Anyway, Nick seems to disagree with the president's plan, though so far all we know is that it seems to involve containing the Avengers at all costs. Jump to a S.H.I.E.L.D. helicarrier where 3 warplanes take off as they're sent encoded orders. Classified Alpha Prime Apla. I think that last one was a typo meant to be another Alpha. The wing leader needs reconfirmation of their coordinates, and he gets it, with orders to secure and subdue as needed. And he seems mighty unsettled at the prospect. At Avengers Mansion, a gathering of West and East Coast teams are told by Fury that the UN and Washington consider Genosha's problems strictly domestic, so super types, Avengers in particular, are benched until given the word otherwise. The government telling superheroes what to do. Can't think of where I've heard that before. Since they don't usually interfere with other countries' affairs, Black Widow asks why the US government is telling them to sit and wait now. As Gyrick takes US agent out of the room to talk about a special mission, Fury says that there are reasons, even though he can't specify, and the feds are serious about the Avengers staying put. Despite the Black Knight wanting specifics and Hercules being indignant, Fury reminds them they signed up to work for the UN. Getting involved would set precedents for superhumans to influence and disrupt the natural order. Hawkeye, not liking the idea of letting people die, wonders if Nick was influenced to cave to politics, and Fury don't like his tone one bit. Captain America, ever the diplomatic leader, asks why the UN thinks the Avengers would interfere, since they stayed out of Genosha's previous crisis. Seems that, alongside Magneto's return making people on edge, word has it someone might want to take a strike at the team, as a statement on human-mutant relations. Crystal leaps to the conclusion that they'll want to hurt her child for being Magneto's granddaughter and a human. She goes so far as to use her powers against Scarlet Witch for trying to hold her back, and runs out of the room saying that Professor X warned them about something like this back in Avengers 350.
Avengers, assemble! Our back issues from last year and confirm whether or not she's right.
Crystal runs to the fellow Inhuman Marilla, who is kind of like the nanny to the Inhuman royal family. And it just so happens she was going to take a walk in the garden with Luna. She hands the girl off to Crystal, but the kid's eyes turn red, a clear signal for Dane to palm strike her out of the woman's arms. And maybe whatever is wrong with her is spreading because his eyes turn red too. Where's the Visine when you need it? Though mentioned and occurring off-panel, fake Luna melts and reforms into a bald woman surging with energy, and wearing a bodysuit numbered 682. With more of the team showing up, she poetically chides the world's indifference to the mutants suffering within Genosha, threatening more than her people's blood will be shed, and to show that not even the Avengers are safe, she explodes. We jump to Gyrick and US agent at the Xavier School 60 miles away?
But they just left right before Crystal went nuts. And only a short time after that came the Earth's Mightiest hero shattering kaboom. Unless those two teleported or ran at top speed to a supersonic jet and immediately took off, I don't see how they could have gotten far enough away to not hear that explosion. Or was Crystal running through the mansion for 20 minutes before finding the spy with the ever-so-convenient power set of shape-shifting and self-detonation?
Also present are the two activists mentioned earlier, Philip and Jennifer, the latter of whom is a mutate, and they plead with Charles Xavier for his assistance in quelling the violence. Other mutates have begun acting as cruel as their oppressors. This war has turned a peaceful populace into killers, and I don't see how decent people can sit around and do nothing. No offense, sir.
Oh, don't worry. Soon enough Marvel will write me as a huge jackwagon. But I still come out of it looking better than Cyclops.
And in case you're curious and aren't already aware, according to the Marvel Wiki, the mutates of Genosha were mutants who had their powers modified by a process created by Philip's father, David Moreau. Xavier agrees with Phil and Jen's sentiments, frightened of the future that would result in doing nothing. Even if the president hadn't contacted him for the job, he'd still want to go. Otherwise, how could he claim to have a soul? However, on top of the protection offered by Gyrick and US Agent, he'd like to bring along a +1, Hank McCoy, one-time Avenger and renowned biogeneticist. And you gotta love how Beast is already prepared with a Hawaiian shirt. Gyrick is at first put off by this, since he's kind of an anti-mutant person, but as he readies another smoke, he seems to relax, mentioning the footage of violence that was smuggled out despite the Genoshan government's best efforts, and how it was recorded by Trish Tilby, McCoy's girlfriend.
Reporter love interests, not just for Superman anymore.
While some of the X-Men go through a Danger Room simulation, Cyclops and Jean Grey observe from the control booth, accompanied by Quicksilver. He's contemplating seeing his wife and child again, try and save his marriage, before he returns to X-Factor. and Scott tells him to follow his heart. Pietro claims he might not even have one. So, he's Mutanity's Martin Shkreli? Iceman's goofing off, using his powers to deflect a laser beam and hitting Rogue across the thigh, which I think counts as transitive sexual harassment. And Gambit retaliates with a charged card since it's his territory. The simulation ends, Rogue's suit mildly damaged from Bobby's prank, and she threatens to send Gambit flying if he tries to kiss and make it better, and renounces his claim of being anyone's territory. Storm scolds Drake for his antics, despite his desire to ease tensions, and he tries restarting the program, but Charles telepathically calls time out on that.
I'm Xavier, the great and powerful. Pay no attention to the man behind the curtain with the hover chair.
As he had anticipated, he and Beast are heading for Genosha now, and he's worried that their interference on Avalon in X-Men 25 may have been too late.
Gyrick is concerned Magneto might show up and make things worse. But see, shortly before this, in X-Men number 25, Mags ripped the adamantium from Wolverine's bones. So Charles countered by breaking his brain and leaving him a vegetable. Guess he decided to keep that under his hat. Or toupee.
Despite the team's previous unpleasant experiences on the island, they're ordered to rendezvous in Hammer Bay in 12 hours, even if Wolverine had already left, and oddly it's Cyclops that's worried that they can't handle the mission without him. Forgot you can wreck a mountain with your eyeballs there, Scotty? Anyway, they're to be on the Blackbird in 30 minutes because I guess it takes 11.5 hours to get to Genosha, and Jean apologizes to Pietro for having to delay his family reunion, but assuring him his wife and child are probably fine. Meanwhile, at the Contradiction, Crystal managed to instinctively create a cyclone that forced the explosion upward, sparing everyone else its deadly force. Well, Circe, whoever she is, seems impressed by the mutate dying for a political cause. Crystal is too distraught to share the sentiment, with Dane trying to comfort her. Nick Fury arrives, accompanied by other Avengers, and Scarlet Witch lays blame on him for putting her niece in danger. Nick points out they only knew an attack was possible, not any details on how or when. He says S.H.I.E.L.D. will handle things, but Crystal objects by tossing Fury aside with her powers. She swears to get her daughter back and make the rebels that have her pay, and much of the team begin following her charge. Fury stops Cap, clarifying that he and S.H.I.E.L.D. are under orders to stop the Avengers' interference, no matter what. Sure enough, on a 2-page spread, a platoon from the Strategic Hazard Intervention Espionage Logistic Directorate stands in the way of the Avengers.
Yeah, the acronym S.H.I.E.L.D. stood for something fairly different back then. But at some point, I guess they figured they didn't need a comma in the middle of their full name.
Meanwhile, Team Peaceful Resolution is on their way to Genosha, prepping for their mission in each their own way. Charles looking over maps, and Beast thinking about taking 40 winks, possibly as a cover for his worry over his lady friend. A distorted transmission comes over the comms using a Stark transceiver to clean it up, and we see Trish Tilby, reporting that the entire Genoshan government has been assassinated by mutate rebels. She cuts to self-proclaimed rebel leader Fabian Cortez, seated in the Citadel, surrounded by dead bodies, and still holding Luna. Declaring himself a follower of Magneto, he says a new day has dawned, one where humans like the girl he holds will suffer. If the army does not lay down their arms by the next day, Cortez will force evolutionary destiny by calling for the deaths of every human man, woman, and child. The issue closes on Xavier, mortified at the cycle of death, continuing into the next generation.
The stakes are established, we got a couple interesting surprises, and the pacing wasn't too bad. And that all adds up to a pretty good starting point for the story. Though there was that odd 60-mile jump to the X-Mansion. It was just poorly juxtaposed to their previous location. There are references to previous stories, so some readers may be in the dark, but I don't think it's hurt this read so far. But then I did read Fatal Attractions, so there's that.
On to the next chapter, X-Men number 26, written by Fabian Nicieza, with art by Andy Kubert, Matt Ryan, and Joe Rosas. The cover features 2 Avengers and 2 X-Men, With Rogue, Cyclops, and Scarlet Witch looking like they're about to face some unseen danger, while Captain America is either bracing for an incoming Acme anvil or belting out a power ballad. Inside, narration describes the Blackbird moving across the South Atlantic, how it's been a full fortnight since Magneto's EM attack that raised mutant-human tensions, and we see Quicksilver's reaction to seeing his daughter in Cortez's arms. Rogue restrains him, saying that listening to the abductor may provide them enough information to save the girl, so they all quiet down to listen to Trish Tilby's report. The transmission isn't all that clear, since the aforementioned electromagnetic pulse wave across the planet still adversely affects communications, but hey, what you gonna do? Narration tells us that Cortez attempted a traitorous power move on Magneto, and now the guy's trying to protect himself from magnetized fury by adding to Genosha's civil unrest.
I'm a little unsure about revealing something like that in narration. If it wasn't intended to be some big revelation down the line, it feels like it'd make more sense if a character mentioned it in either inner or outer dialogue. Maybe it's just that they were counting on readers having already known of Cortez's past actions, and that would have made this little more than a footnote.
Cortez calls on all mutates and mutants to worship the words and example given to them by Magneto, to provide courage and rise against their oppressors in spite of token gestures from the human government. Mankind won't give them the power they deserve, so they need to take it by force. Cyclops notes, at least I'm pretty sure it's him, there's no tail indicator on this batch of speech bubbles, how people are ready to kill and fight for Magneto, not knowing that Professor Xavier wiped his mind. Quicksilver, feeling his dad got what was coming to him, only hears the same Magneto spiel from Cortez, and is angry he can't do anything about his daughter being a pawn, not even taking consolation in Storm's promises to save Luna. "If I have learned one thing in my life, Windrider, it is that only a fool makes any kind of allowance for hope and happy endings."
You're Dan Didio, aren't you?
Ororo counters that Luna's abduction from the Avengers Mansion shows Cortez's desperation to shield himself from Magneto, which, yeah, this would have been a good place to describe the Acolyte's betrayal right here instead, and that is the key to her rescue. Though Pietro finds it absurd, Psyche concurs, saying that strategically this could work in their favor, compounded by Gambit saying that they can convince Cortez he'll need the Xavier students to protect him from the catatonic Magneto. "Which is what I like to see for a change. The X-Men going into a fight with an ace up our sleeves."
And that pun is the only reason Gambit was brought on this mission. You can toss him out of the plane now.
As Trish Tilby wonders why Magneto doesn't speak for himself, the broadcast plays in Avalon, Magneto's space station haven, where the catatonic man is watched over by Colossus, who left the X-Men in the Fatal Attraction storyline. But that clearly hasn't changed his sense of fashion. Piotr notes how they could easily take a live image of Eric Lencher's current state, relying on life support machinery, but he wonders if that would help or hurt Genosha. Exodus, Magneto's right-hand mutant, walks in, sensing the former X-Man's inner conflict, and asks why he parted ways with the team in the first place. Petey says that he grew tired of being a destructive force for other people's ambitions. He'd prefer to use his agricultural and artistic skills to create something good. Exodus calls him naive, and that Charles Xavier's pacifism will still need to be worked out of him, but for now, he wants a private chat with his leader. You know, the guy with the steam-cleaned brain.
I just thought of how Magneto can control this situation. Who here has seen Weekend at Bernie's?
As Colossus looks upon the Earth, wondering what manner of nuttiness he's gotten himself involved in, the Avengers are fighting it out with S.H.I.E.L.D. Crystal declares she doesn't want to hurt them, but has to save her child, and Wanda notes that they know the agents are just following orders. Then Awkward mentions to her sis-in-law that they could easily get rid of them, but don't want to hurt them. It's just weird dialogue progression. And that's not even mentioning how they say things to each other that they already know, like Luna being Wanda's niece. The pair use the brawl as a cover to get to a Quinjet, and Black Knight decides to help. Hercules gives them cover by hurling a huge chunk of wreckage at the helicarrier above, and while onboard commander Dum Dum Dugan talks big, he takes the hint and orders them back to sea. Nick Fury is arguing with Cap, who's knocking back a couple of agents, until Dane knocks Fury out with his Nero blade. The captain doesn't think that what they're doing is necessarily smart, but the Black Knight hops into the nearby aircraft saying that the smart thing and the right thing aren't always the same. So Steve tells him to fire up the engines.
These couple of pages and the panels are just a bit confusing. Between the vagueness of some of the background art and how much of a given panel that Cap, Nick, and the beaten agents take up, it was difficult enough to tell that they were anywhere near an aircraft, let alone right outside the cockpit. And the following page has an overhead shot of Dane entering the pilot's seat, so that didn't help much either. It just seemed all the more surprising.
Unfortunately, they're surrounded by more S.H.I.E.L.D. agents, and taking off would incinerate them. After Cap contacts Black Widow, she confers with War Machine to help clear the area of aggressors and fly alongside them to deter pursuit, made easier with Hercules having scared off the helicarrier earlier. Cersei, fixating on the Black Knight and not exactly enjoying the thought of him being alone with Crystal, tags along. We don't see her get to the plane, so we have to assume she flew there based on what Vision says. Hercules doesn't like being left out of the fight, but Hawkeye tells him they're about to have a brawl of their own against the politicians at the UN.
Combating bureaucracy was the seldom remembered 13th labor of Heracles.
After several pages of ads from Marvel's Midnight Suns imprint, whatever that was, and man do those ghosts look lame, we cut back to Genosha, narration detailing the irony of a beautiful, mountainous landscape running across the center of the very island Professor X is trying to unify. He and his ragtag envoy are driving along when they're ambushed by gas grenades. Charles psychically instructs Beast to grab some gas masks and take them both up the cliff. He intends to meet with the mutate rebels to better understand the current turmoil, and it's better if the others aren't involved. They come upon a squad of commandos that aren't big on pleasantries, though one of them seems pretty laid back, enough to just be sitting all chill-like. But when Beast takes off Charles's mask, they're greeted by Renee Majcombe, an old friend of Chuck's who happens to be a biogeneticist and leader of the bipartisan rebel battalion, comprised of humans and mutates, devoted to stopping atrocities from both sides. And despite limited resources, they managed to get Chuck a modified wheelchair, X-brand and everything.
But it doesn't hover, does it? I mean, yes, this is a war zone and people are slaughtering each other at the drop of a hat, but you couldn't spring for a hover chair. Okay, I'll make do.
As their transport arrives, Majcombe explains that before fighting broke out, she was one of the many that felt the Genoshan government wasn't doing enough to heal the divide of the populace. Laws written on paper cannot undo years of ingrained social behavior. Well, she ain't wrong. So she prepared for situations like the one they're facing, with other scientists, social workers, lawyers, and so on. As they begin heading away from Hammer Bay, Charles apologizes to Hank that they won't be heading to save Trish, that focusing on saving the many is for the greater good. War makes for difficult decisions, where friends and loved ones risk being sacrificed to end the madness. And unbeknownst to them, U.S. Agent has hitched a ride.
Until they drive over a rock that's in just the right place and is just the right size to smack him in the face. Which I hope they don't skip over. That'd be hilarious.
An hour passes and the X-Men land 2 miles from the Genoshan capital, cloaking their ship after some brief commentary on the effect their previous trip to Genosha had. Since she was with Wolverine at the time, Rogue can't help but wonder what the old knucklehead has been up to since he left a week prior. She's told that while everyone misses him, they have to respect his wishes, and yeesh, this just looks weird. Looks like Storm is smushing her cheek right into Rogue's eye. Shouldn't that be draining her powers? Anyway, they start... Hey, is that Revanche? The woman Psylocke switched bodies with? Come to think of it, she was on board during Fabian Cortez's monologue, but she hasn't had any lines. Okay, moving on. They're about to split into 3 teams when they're confronted by a trio known as the Unrelenting, or the Unforgiven. It sounds good to be either one at first. If you're not here to kill any and all human scum who oppose us, then we will turn our attentions to you and show you why Cortez has bestowed upon us the title of The Unforgiven.
Is it because you all really like that Clint Eastwood movie? Yeah. Yes.
Psyche informs them they're there to stop the killing, not join in. When one of the mutates says that isn't Magneto's way, Pietro goes ballistic, delivering a flurry of speed punches while saying Magneto's way left him a vegetable. And who would happen to be within earshot but Cortez, his suspicions of Magnus now confirmed. Then nothing can stop me from seeing this country, and everyone in it, awash in a raging river of bloodshed.
Quicksilver went all punch-happy on just one goon, and we don't even know if that was enough to knock him out. Even if it did, there are still two others that likely just heard their vaunted leader say he wanted everyone on the island dead. Not just humans, everyone. Man, Cortez is stupid.
In Hammer Bay, narration mentions that Havershaw Heights was but a week ago a ritzy section of the city exclusive to the ruling upper class. Now, the caviar class has joined the sewer scrapers in the streets, face to face, hand to hand, bound together by an unholy matrimony of genetic diversity, until death do them part.
I kind of like that line. It has a certain sad juxtaposition with the words and the imagery, and it really works for the moment. Marriage, which is intended to be joyous and enduring, against the contradictory sight of people at each other's throats. Which actually comes with the betrothal territory, come to think of it. Ha-cha-cha-cha!
The Avengers have arrived on the scene, ready to put a stop to the fighting by fighting! Narration describes how tired Genosians are of the conflict and the hatred, and how the Avengers are seen by humans as the leading authority figures. Wanda turns down a mutate's request for her to lead them, and then one of the humans goes, "Oh, if you don't want the Avengers, we'll take them." But this is all too distracting for Crystal, ready to use a hurricane to hasten their search for her daughter. Then she's interrupted by the explosive attack that selectively incinerates the human fighters. The issue closes on the arrival of Exodus, declaring that if it saves the mutates, every human will be exterminated.
Seems his little chat with his savior got a little one-sided. Lord Magnus, what should I do? Yes, murder all the humans on Genosha. That's just what I was thinking. Why, thank you, my lord. I don't think this cape is too showy either. Butter pecan is my favorite flavor of ice cream, too.
The pacing and time progression isn't perfect, but it doesn't detract too much from the immersion of the story. Sometimes the dialogue can feel very expository for the sake of the reader, even though the characters are already aware of the information they're relaying. It's this kind of situation that the narrative captions would have probably worked better in place of the dialogue.
And after the show, I'm going to redeem this coupon, good for $5 off a Sega Genesis or Super NES game, and a free Ghost Rider collector's issue. Just need to find the nearest KB toy store and... Uh-oh.
And you know, for someone like me that was kind of inconsistent with the periods in which he bought X-Men comics, it's easy to forget that Magneto's a grandfather. Even if you know that Pietro is his son and he's married to Crystal and they have a kid together, it's hardly ever brought up. I don't know if they've ever had a scene where Magneto just talks or interacts with Luna. It'd be nice to see here, even though he's catatonic, but yeah, that's probably not likely. And on an unrelated note, how come no one told me that Lorenzo Lamas was one of the Avengers? And that he's apparently a big Hunger Games fan.
Next week, we see Exodus face off against the Avengers, and how the X-Men deal with Cortez now that their ace in the hole was spoiled by Marvel's quickest mouth. I'm the Angry Spork, and man, have I got issues.